an altitude of 65,000 feet, about 20,000 meters at the edge of the swamp zone. Here, the air is so thin it's only 7% of sea level density, and the temperature constantly hovers around minus 55 degrees Celsius. Not even the highest flying migratory birds can reach this altitude. It is a dead zone of extreme cold and absolute silence governed by pure physics. Yet in this barren expanse of the sky, a giant bird with a wingspan of 39.9 meters, wider than a Boeing 737 airliner, is gliding silently at a speed of about 600 kilometers per hour. This is the U.S. Navy's RQ-4A BAMS-D, the apex predator of the Global Hawk family, a strategic high-altitude, long-endurance unmanned reconnaissance aircraft with a unit cost of up to $220 million. It carries the absolute pinnacle of human military technology, synthetic aperture radar and ultra-high-resolution electro-optical sensors capable of piercing through clouds from tens of thousands of meters up to clearly see the wake of a wooden speedboat in the Persian Gulf. It has no stealth coating, appearing as massive as an elephant on a radar screen. It carries no weapons, entirely defenseless against even the most outdated second-generation fighter jets. In the Pentagon's playbook, its defense mechanism is brutally simple, carrying a trace of superpower arrogance: fly high enough that enemy radars can't detect it, and high enough that outdated anti-aircraft missiles will burn through all their solid fuel before reaching that altitude, ultimately falling back to Earth under gravity's pull. That was the reality until the early hours of June 2019 in the skies over the Strait of Hormuz, when this self-proclaimed eye of God was violently blinded. What shot it down was not Russia's world-renowned S-400 air defense system, nor was it some epoch-making hypersonic weapon. It was an obscure truck-mounted field air defense system, reverse-engineered and pieced together locally by Iran. This is Tactical Trace. We don't worship the tech tree. We only ask one question: does it work? The answer from that early morning in 2019 left the Pentagon in a long silence. If you believe that a single truck rewrote the logic of modern air defense, type Dune in the comment section. To understand why a $220 million aircraft could be instantly obliterated, we need to open the U.S. Air Force's Strategic Reconnaissance textbook to see how this arrogance was cultivated over decades of the Cold War. Starting with the U-2 spy plane in the 1950s, the Americans held a superstitious belief: altitude is survival. High altitude means a broader horizon, a longer radar line of sight, and physical immunity to the vast majority of surface-to-air weapons. For an anti-aircraft missile to climb to 20,000 meters, it must overcome massive gravitational pull, which rapidly depletes its kinetic energy. By the time a missile struggles up to the edge of the stratosphere, it is often a spent force. Its speed drops sharply, and its control surfaces can barely generate enough aerodynamic control force in the thin air. If the target aircraft makes even a slight maneuver, the missile will miss due to its overly wide turning radius. The RQ-4A Global Hawk is the ultimate product of this philosophy. To achieve extreme endurance, over 30 hours, its wings were designed as incredibly long, straight wings. This design generates massive lift at low cruising speeds, yielding excellent fuel economy. But this also means its physical structure is extremely fragile, with an exceedingly low maximum G-force tolerance. It cannot roll or dive like a fighter jet. It can only act like a giant cross slowly gliding across a sheet of ice. The U.S. Navy firmly believed that Iran's air defense network was composed of old Soviet SAM-2s and SAM-5s, along with American Hawk missiles purchased back in the 1970s during the Pahlavi dynasty. These antiques either couldn't reach an altitude of 20,000 meters at all, or, the moment their radars powered on, they would be preemptively locked onto and suppressed by the U.S. military's electronic warfare network. This was an absolute confidence based on a generational technological gap. The RQ-4A repeatedly hopped between international airspace and Iranian airspace along the edge of the Strait of Hormuz, like a heavily armored knight standing outside a medieval city wall, taunting the archers inside, certain they couldn't draw a bow hard enough to pierce his armor. It didn't even activate any evasive routing, just arrogantly slicing through the night sky in a perfectly straight line. Here at Tactical Trace, we love running the numbers. Because at the end of the day, war isn't about whose technology looks cooler, it's about whose financial statements can hold out the longest. An RQ-4A BAMS-D is more than just a pile of aviation aluminum and carbon fiber. Its belly is stuffed with the highest grade of military microprocessors, satellite data link terminals, and precision optical instruments capable of operating stably under extreme temperature shifts at high altitudes. A $220 million unit cost, and that doesn't even factor in the costs of training rear echelon command operators, leasing satellite bandwidth, and the staggering logistical maintenance required for its daily takeoffs and landings. Standing opposite it was the Khordad air defense system, lying in ambush among the sand dunes of Iran's southern coast. This is a weapon dripping with rugged industrial styling. Lacking any sci-fi aesthetics, it is essentially a truck chassis integrating a phased array radar and carrying 3 Sayad-2 anti-aircraft missiles.
Western intelligence communities generally consider it to be a deep, reverse-engineered derivative of the Russian Buk system. Iran never publicly discloses its military costs, but international defense think tanks are well aware of the cost structure of modern anti-aircraft missiles. A tactical interceptor utilizing solid fuel, a composite seeker, and mobile truck launching at most costs in the low hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit. Even if we maximize the cost estimate of this Iranian domestic missile to 1 million, it still presents a suffocating 220-to-1 cost-exchange ratio. The superpower spent the equivalent of a light frigate to build a proud strategic reconnaissance aircraft, yet the adversary used the equivalent of a Ferrari sports car to instantly turn it into an expensive firework raining down over the Persian Gulf.
At this point, viewers with basic military knowledge will surely ask a fatal question. Where was the U.S. military's electronic warfare? At the time, roughly 30 kilometers away from the RQ-4A, there was a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft carrying an advanced electronic intelligence and radar warning system manned by a crew of 9. Logically, the script for a modern air defense confrontation should play out like this. The moment a ground-based air defense radar powers on, its powerful electromagnetic waves expose it like a searchlight in the dark. The radar warning receivers on the Global Hawk, paired with the EW support from the P-8A, can sniff out these hostile radar waves from a vast distance. Subsequently, the U.S. military would either deploy high-power electromagnetic jamming against the radar, turning the operator's screen to snow, or immediately notify the Global Hawk to alter its course and exit the missile's engagement envelope. But all of this relies on one prerequisite. The enemy has to turn their radar on. There is no electronic warfare equipment in the world capable of jamming a silent system that emits no electromagnetic signals. In those early morning hours, the Iranian air defense troops played a masterclass in extreme electromagnetic silence, EMCON. The fire control radar on that 3 Khordad truck hidden in the dunes remained powered off the entire time, like a venomous snake holding its breath in the tall grass. So, how did they pinpoint the Global Hawk's location? The answer isn't mystical, it's actually quite simple. Low-frequency early warning radars deployed deep inland. These types of radars have extremely long wavelengths and poor precision. They cannot guide a missile directly, but it is incredibly difficult for USEW systems to effectively suppress them. All they needed to provide was a rough azimuth and flight heading. Add to this the fact that the Global Hawk's flight path was extremely predictable, its speed was constant, and it made zero evasive maneuvers. The air defense commander could perfectly calculate exactly where it would be in the next moment without ever turning on the precision fire control radar. This wasn't high-tech intelligence warfare, it was basic geometry and tactical patience. The air defense commander simply waited in total radio silence, watching this 220 million behemoth walk step by step right into the no-escape zone. 4 Vivo Way MA. The air over the Strait of Hormuz was exceptionally still. The RQ-4A Global Hawk was flying its predetermined route in a perfect cruising attitude, while U.S. operators far away in Nevada watched the crisp radar images transmitting onto their screens. It was at this exact moment that the snake in the dunes bared its fangs. When the Global Hawk entered the optimal firing window, the fire control radar of the 3 Khordad system was suddenly forced online at the very last second. It's akin to fumbling around in a pitch-black room, and the assassin waits until the cold barrel of the gun is pressed firmly against your forehead before clicking on a blinding tactical flashlight. The high-power radar beam instantly locked onto the massive cross, with its 40-meter wingspan and an egregiously large radar cross-section (RCS). It was only at this moment that the alarm bells finally rang on the Global Hawk's radar warning receivers and on the P-8A 30 kilometers away. But it was too late. 2 Sayad-2 solid-fuel anti-aircraft missiles blasted off, trailing blinding plumes of fire. From radar lock, missile ignition, punching through the troposphere, and piercing into the stratosphere, the entire kill chain was compressed into a mere 15 seconds. During those 15 seconds, the USEW systems went into overdrive, attempting to crack the radar frequencies to spoof the lock. But the radar on this scrapped-together truck displayed an anti-jamming capability that vastly exceeded Western intelligence estimates. The jamming failed. Facing high-speed incoming anti-aircraft missiles, what could a $220 million drone do? The answer is absolutely nothing. It had no radar stealth capabilities, so the missile seeker was locked on dead tight. Its physical structure was so frail that if it even attempted a slightly aggressive evasive maneuver, those long, slender wings would snap off on their own midair. The chaff and flares it deployed were rendered completely meaningless, like throwing a handful of dust in front of a searchlight under the intense illumination of a phased array radar at such close range. A Sayad-2 missile detonated its high-explosive fragmentation warhead just tens of meters away from the Global Hawk. Thousands of high-speed shrapnel fragments ripped through the carbon fiber fuselage, severed the main spar, and destroyed the engine. The $220 million crystallization of the American military-industrial complex was reduced to burning wreckage filling the sky, trailing thick black smoke as it plummeted toward the waters off southern Iran. On the screens of operators halfway across the world in the U.S. homeland, the feed instantly turned to dead, silent static.
The crash of this RQ-4A didn't just make a splash in the Persian Gulf, it triggered an earthquake inside the strategic planning rooms of the Pentagon. From that day forward, the non-stealth drone reconnaissance routes of the U.S. military in the high-risk airspace over the Persian Gulf were forced to pull back by dozens, even hundreds of nautical miles. The ultimate surveillance tool, which cost $220 million to guarantee absolute strategic transparency, ended up trading that transparency for a red line drawn by a truck worth a few $100,000, a red line the U.S. military dare not easily cross. But the true lesson here isn't simply you will die without stealth. Stealth is only part of the answer. What truly brought this global hawk down were two much more fundamental failures. The first failure was intelligence arrogance. The U.S. military vastly underestimated the true capabilities of Iran's air defense systems. They locked their adversary into a technical profile from a decade ago, never seriously considering that the enemy had already mastered new tactics. The second failure was tactical laziness. The Global Hawk flew repeatedly along a predictable fixed route without a single evasive maneuver. It behaved like a man walking the exact same path home at the exact same time every day. No matter how fast he walks, a patient hunter will always have the opportunity to wait for him at the intersection. The 3 Khordad system proved that in asymmetric warfare, the defender doesn't need to fight you head-on across all frequencies and all altitudes. They only need to find the most arrogant, most rigid node in your system, and then use extreme tactical patience, combined with the most basic principles of physics, to deliver a fatal strike. It wasn't the most expensive weapon that won that early morning, it was the commander waiting in the dunes, holding his breath, resisting the urge to turn on his radar who won that early morning. Here is tactical trace. We don't worship the tech tree. We only ask one question: does it work? We do not blindly idolize machines. We believe in the equation, and the equation tells us that it is the right tool, paired with the right tactical patience, that wins the war, not the most expensive tool.